There comes a time in every seeker's life when the outer forms of religion no longer satisfy the inner ache of the soul, not because religion has failed, but because the soul has begun to outgrow the belief that God resides somewhere outside itself. And so, without any fanfare, without any announcement, there arises in your heart a quiet question: where is God? Where is this presence that the prophets spoke of, that the mystics tasted, that Jesus lived? If you are listening with the ears of the Spirit, you will discover that God is not found in argument, not in doctrine, not in belief, not in tradition. God is revealed in silence. It is in the silence that the true meaning of the word Christ begins to dawn upon the consciousness. You see, the Christ is not a name. It is not a title. It is not a historical label we attach to one man who walked the hills of Galilee. The Christ is a state of divine being. It is the living presence of God expressing itself through individual consciousness. And because this presence is infinite, because it is omnipresent, it cannot belong to one man or one age or one faith. It is the light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world. But for 2,000 years, humanity has repeated the name Christ without entering the silence from which that name arises. We have worshipped the outer form while missing the inner essence. And the inner essence is this: the Christ is the I of you. The Christ is the very presence that looks through your eyes, breathes your breath, beats your heart, thinks your thoughts. It is the divine identity, forever hidden behind the mask of personality. When Jesus used the word I, he did not mean the personal self. He did not mean the carpenter's son. He did not mean a man apart from you. He spoke from the eternal I, the infinite I, the divine I am that is the substance of all life. And when he said, I am the light of the world, he was revealing the nature of the Christ, not claiming an exclusive privilege, but speaking from the reality that belongs to every soul. There is a vast difference between repeating the words of Scripture and entering the silence out of which those words were spoken. In the silence, you learn that the Christ is nearer than breath, closer than your own sense of I. In silence, you learn that you are never speaking as a person searching for God. You are the very one through whom God reveals himself. This realization does not come through intellectual study. It does not come through emotional fervor. It comes through a yielding, a gentle surrender of the mind's belief in a personal identity. It comes when you become still enough to hear the whisper beneath all thought: I am here. I am the life of you. I am the presence you have sought. This is the silence behind the name Christ. This is the beginning of spiritual vision. This is the threshold of the inner kingdom. And as you stand at this threshold, something in you begins to awaken, not the human self, but the spiritual identity that has been waiting through centuries of conditioning. Not a new self, not an improved self, but the self that has always been, the self that could never be touched by sin, disease, or fear. Do not look outward for the Christ. Do not seek a figure on a cross or a teacher in history. Turn within, into the quiet space where the sense of I arises before thought. There you will find the Christ, not as a belief, not as a hope, but as the living presence of God, expressing as your very being. It is to this inner recognition that Jesus called humanity. It is this inner recognition that Joel Goldsmith spent his life explaining, and it is to this inner recognition that we now turn as we begin to explore the revelation that religion could not hold, but that the soul can never forget. The Christ is the I of you, and the journey begins in stillness. As we move deeper, let us be very still, For what we touch now is sacred. We are not examining history for the sake of argument, nor are we criticizing any tradition. We are simply unveiling a truth that has been obscured by centuries of sincere misunderstanding. When a revelation is given to the world, it comes through the consciousness of an individual. But its purpose is never to glorify the individual. It is to awaken the same consciousness in all who hear the message. Jesus came not to display a unique spiritual privilege, but to reveal the spiritual identity that belongs to every man, woman, and child on this earth. He came to show that the Christ is the true self of every soul. Yet, as humanity received this revelation, something very human occurred. Instead of recognizing the presence behind the man, we began to worship the man and forget the presence. Instead of entering the consciousness from which Jesus spoke, we built systems to admire him from afar. And the moment that happened, the living Christ was veiled behind a historical figure. But Jesus never intended to be worshipped. He intended to be understood. He did not say, "I alone am the light of the world." He said, "You are the light of the world." He did not say, "Only I and my Father are one." He prayed that all may be one, even as we are one. And he did not say, "Follow me, so that you may admire me." He said, "Follow me, that you may do the works that I do." The purpose of a spiritual teacher is not to become an object of devotion. The purpose is to awaken the same realization in the hearts of those who are ready. But when the teacher leaves, the world, the human mind, unable to grasp the depth of the revelation, clings to the form of the teacher and loses the spirit of the teaching. And so a living revelation becomes a doctrine, a spiritual identity becomes a creed, a universal truth becomes a historical event. Religion, with all its beauty and devotion, eventually wrapped the name of Jesus in such reverence that the very principle he taught became inaccessible. Instead of discovering the Christ within, humanity bowed before the Christ without. Instead of awakening to the presence, humanity worshipped a person, and slowly, without malice, but with deep sincerity, the revelation was replaced by the ritual. Jesus said, "The Father within me, he doeth the works." Yet how many have been taught to look outside themselves for the Father? Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is within you." Yet how many have been instructed to seek a kingdom in the sky? Jesus said, "The works that I do shall you do also." Yet how many have believed such works to be impossible? This is the great misunderstanding, not a failure of faith, but a failure of identity. For when you believe that the Christ belongs to one man alone, you separate yourself from the very presence that seeks expression as you. When you exalt the messenger above the message, you turn revelation into remembrance, and remembrance into ritual. And then the living presence, the indwelling Christ, becomes a distant hope instead of an immediate reality. Joel Goldsmith never criticized religion. He honored its role, its beauty, its sincerity, but he also understood this. Religion inherited the outer story of Jesus without entering the inner consciousness from which Jesus lived. Religion preserved the biography of the man while losing the revelation of the I that animated him. That is why the world still prays to God as though God were out there. That is why suffering persists even among the devout. That is why spiritual longing remains unfulfilled despite centuries of worship. We have been looking in the wrong direction, outward instead of inward, upward instead of inward, toward a person instead of toward the presence that Jesus called the Father within. This is not a criticism. It is an invitation to rediscover the revelation Jesus intended, the revelation that Joel Goldsmith reawakened. The Christ is not a person to worship, but a presence to recognize. And until this recognition dawns, the spiritual life remains a search instead of a realization. Let us be clear. Honoring Jesus is not wrong, but to honor him truly is to understand what he understood, to see as he saw, to live as he lived, from the center of divine identity, from the I within, from the Christ that is not limited to one form but expressed through the infinite variety of life. This is the misunderstanding we must gently lay aside, not by rejecting religion, not by opposing belief, but by going deeper than belief into the awareness of the one who says, I. For the revelation Jesus brought can never be restored to its purity until it is recognized where he placed it within you. Let us move now into the heart of the revelation, not the revelation given 2,000 years ago alone, but the revelation that is being whispered into your own consciousness at this very moment. For truth is never a matter of history. Truth is eternally present, eternally speaking, eternally waiting for recognition. And if you listen deeply, you will hear the same voice that spoke through Jesus, the same presence that he called the Father, the same light he named the Christ. What, then, did Jesus reveal? He revealed the universality of the I am. When Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he was not describing a human being. He was not identifying a personality. He was speaking from the infinite identity that is the life of all creation. He spoke from the same I am that spoke to Moses, saying, I am that I am. He spoke from the divine consciousness that existed before Abraham, before Israel, before the world. This is why he could say, before Abraham was, I am. Not I was, but I am the eternal, unchanging, impersonal presence. You must understand this clearly, for the entire spiritual path rests upon this one realization. The I that Jesus spoke from is the I that you speak from when you say, I am. The difference is not in nature, but in awareness. Jesus lived from that awareness. Humanity has lived from forgetfulness. And so we made of Jesus something he never claimed to be, a solitary miracle worker, a unique spiritual exception. But he never presented himself as an exception. He came as an example. He came as a witness to the truth of our being. Everything he said, everything he did, pointed not to his superiority, but to the Christ nature within all. This is why he said, you are the light of the world. This is why he said, the kingdom of God is within you. This is why he said, the works that I do shall you do also. This is why he said, I ascend to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. He did not divide himself from humanity. Humanity divided itself from him. When Jesus said, I and the Father are one, he revealed what is true of every soul. He was speaking from the Father consciousness, the God awareness, the place where there is no personal identity, only divine expression. And in that consciousness, all are one, all are equal, all are complete, all are whole. But because human thought identifies with the body and the personality, we assume Jesus must be speaking about his particular person. Yet no person can be one with the infinite. Only the infinite can be one with the infinite. Jesus was not proclaiming the greatness of Jesus. He was revealing the nature of the I that lives as all. This I is birthless. This I is deathless. This I is the spiritual reality behind every form. This I is the Christ. And here lies the essence of the teaching. The moment you say, I am, you are using the divine name. You are invoking the presence that Jesus embodied. But when you attach that I am to a condition, I am sick, I am afraid, I am poor, I am unworthy, you are identifying the infinite with the finite, the eternal with the temporary, the real with the unreal. Jesus refused to do that. He refused to identify the Christ with condition. He refused to say, I am the needy one, I am the sinner, I am the victim. Instead, he said, I am the light. I am the resurrection. I am the truth. I am the life. He spoke always from the standpoint of the eternal identity. And that is why his words carried authority, because they arose from what is true, not from what appears. Joel Goldsmith understood this with such depth that it changed the entire direction of his life. He discovered that when the I of you is recognized as the Christ, life begins to unfold from the inside out. No longer do you seek God externally. No longer do you pray as a person pleading with a distant power. Instead, you rest in the realization that the Father, the Infinite, is the very essence of your being. This is the universality of the I Am. It is not limited by race or religion, by creed or culture, by time or place. It is the divine identity present in every mystic, every prophet, every awakened soul. It is the silent core of all spiritual revelation. And it is the truth that Jesus came to reveal, not as a doctrine, but as a living reality. The I Am is the way. The I Am is the truth. The I Am is the life. Not because the man Jesus claimed it, but because the Christ, the universal presence of God, speaks those words through every awakened heart. And so the question now is not, who was Jesus? The question is, who is the I that I am? And as that question dawns in your contemplative moments, the Christ begins to reveal itself not as a concept, not as a philosophy, but as the living presence that has been the core of your being from the beginning. As we continue, let us turn inward again, for the truth we approach cannot be grasped intellectually. It must be sensed, felt, recognized in the silence of your own being. Truth is not taught from one mind to another. Truth is revealed from the depth of the soul to the depth of the soul. And it is in this spirit that we explore what Joel Goldsmith discovered through years of contemplation, meditation, and inner listening. Joel Goldsmith was not a theologian. He was not a metaphysician in the academic sense. He was a man who sought reality. He wanted to know God not as a belief, not as a hope, not as a doctrine, but as living presence. And so he turned away from outward systems, away from rituals, away from second-hand truth. He sat in silence, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, waiting, listening, yielding. And in this stillness, something extraordinary began to unfold. Joel discovered that the Christ is not an attribute. It is not a quality. It is not even an experience. The Christ is the invisible presence of God expressing as individual being. It is the spiritual identity that lives where you think your personal self resides. It is the I behind the I, the life behind the life, the consciousness behind all consciousness. He discovered that the Christ is not confined to the figure of Jesus. It is not limited to one religion, one tradition, one nation, or one era. It is the eternal selfhood that existed before you were born and will exist long after the body has dissolved. It is the infinite nature of God revealing itself at the point of your individuality. Joel realized that every healing, every supply, every illumination comes not from a person asking God, but from the Christ revealing itself as the truth of being. When Jesus healed, he did so not by reaching outward to a power. He did so by recognizing the presence within the Father, within the Christ within. And that same presence lives as you. That same light seeks expression through you. That same consciousness is the foundation of your very existence. You see, the Christ is not a power you acquire. It is the nature of your being. But as long as you identify yourself as a separate person, as a mind with private thoughts, as a body with private conditions, you cannot perceive the Christ. Not because the Christ is absent, but because your attention is fixed on the garment instead of the life that wears it. Joel discovered this by experience. In moments of profound silence, he felt the dissolving of personal identity. He could sense the presence moving through him, thinking through him, speaking through him. He realized that the words he spoke were not his words. They were the utterances of the Christ consciousness pouring through an open, surrendered mind. And this became the foundation of his ministry, that the Christ is impersonal. It belongs to no one. It expresses through anyone who becomes still enough to hear its voice. The Christ is the invisible fabric of all creation. It is the substance of every form. It is the intelligence that orchestrates the body, the harmony that organizes life, the love that holds the universe in being. It is the same presence that Jesus revealed, the same presence Moses glimpsed, the same presence that is spoken through saints, sages, and mystics throughout time. Joel discovered that when the personal sense of I is set aside even for a moment, the Christ rushes into expression, not as an emotional sensation, but as a deep peace, a clarity, a knowing, a sense of being cared for, guided, sustained by an infinite love. He found that the Christ is not awakened by effort. It is revealed by surrender. It is not summoned by words. It is known by silence. It does not rise through striving. It appears the moment you stop trying to be something and simply be. And so he taught that healing is not a correction of the external. It is the recognition of the inner. Supply is not the attraction of something absent. It is the unveiling of the infinite fullness already present. Peace is not the elimination of conflict. It is the revelation of the Christ, which has never been troubled. Joel often said, "We do not bring God into our experience. We bring our experience into God." This is the secret of the Christ. When you identify with the presence, your outer life takes on the harmony of that presence. When you identify with the personal self, your outer life reflects the limitations of that belief. This was Joel Goldsmith's discovery, that the Christ is the invisible reality of all being, that it is the essence of your existence, and that the entire spiritual journey is the quiet remembrance of what has always been true. Nothing is added, nothing is acquired, nothing is improved, only recognized. And as this recognition deepens, you begin to understand why Jesus said, "He that hath seen me hath seen the Father." Not because Jesus was the only Christ, but because the Christ is the universal self. And when that self shines through any individual, the Father is revealed. This is the Christ as Joel discovered it, the silent presence, living as you, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to be recognized, waiting to be lived. Let us move now into one of the most liberating realizations on the spiritual path, a truth so simple, yet so profound, that its absence has shaped centuries of spiritual misunderstanding. It is this: God is impersonal, not distant, not cold, not mechanical, but free of human attributes, free of partiality, free of preference, free of the limitations we impose upon the divine through personal belief. Religion, in its sincerity, could not teach this, not because religion wished to withhold truth, but because the human mind was not yet able to grasp a God without a face, a God without form, a God without human desires. The mind always seeks to make God in its own image a personal ruler, a parental figure, a being who loves some, blesses some, forgives some, and judges others. But this is not the nature of God. This is the nature of human imagination. Joel Goldsmith discovered that the moment you make God personal, you separate yourself from the infinite. You create the illusion of a God somewhere and a seeker somewhere else. You create a gap that must be bridged, a distance that must be crossed, a need that must be fulfilled, and this false distance becomes the source of all suffering. But God cannot be personal, for if God were personal, God would be limited. If God preferred one soul over another, God would be divided. If God rewarded the good and punished the bad, God would cease to be omnipresent. Love. The impersonal nature of God means this. God does not act upon you. God expresses as you. God does not choose for you. God unfolds through you. God does not send blessings. God is the blessing that is your life. Religion, as a structure of belief, could not teach this because the personal mind cannot comprehend a presence that does not think as humans think. And so, to comfort the mind, religion gave God a personality. It gave God anger, mercy, disappointment, approval. It gave God human emotions so that human beings could relate to the infinite. But the spiritual journey is not about making God relatable. It is about realizing that the one we call God is the very essence of our own being. When Jesus referred to the Father, he did not speak of a being outside himself. He spoke of the impersonal life within the infinite consciousness that acts without preference, loves without condition, gives without measure. He said, "The Father knoweth what you have need of before you ask," not because God is watching from a distance, but because the Father is the life of you. The Father is the mind through which you think, the breath through which you live, the being through which you are conscious. This is why Jesus could say, "It is the Father within me that doeth the works." He understood that no person performs a spiritual act. Only the impersonal presence expresses itself through the form we call human. Joel Goldsmith taught this with extraordinary clarity. He said that once you understand the impersonal nature of God, prayer changes forever. You stop praying to God and you begin resting in God. You stop asking for things and you begin recognizing that the fullness of the infinite is already the substance of your being. You stop seeking God's intervention because you realize there is no external power to intervene, only the inner presence to be recognized. This impersonal God is not aloof. This impersonal God is pure love, but it is a love that does not fluctuate. It does not come and go. It does not depend on your conduct, your beliefs, or your worthiness. It simply is, and because it is impersonal, it is everywhere equally. It is the same in the saint and in the sinner. It is the same in the enlightened and in the ignorant. It is the same in every creature, every form, every expression of life. Religion could not teach this because an impersonal God cannot be controlled, cannot be bargained with, cannot be used as a tool for human morality. An impersonal God cannot be claimed as ours against theirs. An impersonal God does not punish, does not reward, does not withhold, does not bribe. And so, for many centuries, the world held to a personal deity because the personal mind could understand it, but the spiritual heart cannot awaken fully until it moves beyond this belief. To awaken to the impersonal nature of God is to awaken to the truth that God is not a someone, not an other, not a being separate from your being. God is the invisible fabric of your existence. God is the I that lives as you. God is the Christ, the eternal, impersonal, universal presence expressing individually as your life. And when you know this, you no longer ask God to change the world. You allow God to reveal the world as it sees it. You no longer plead for healing. You rest in the truth that the Christ, your true self, is never sick. You no longer pursue supply. You recognize that the infinite cannot lack. You no longer seek peace. You discover that peace is the nature of your own being. This is the truth religion could not teach, not out of unwillingness, but out of necessity. Humanity had to grow into it. And now, as consciousness evolves, this truth stands ready to be understood by all who can enter the silence and listen. God is not personal. God is presence. God is not elsewhere. God is the life that says, I. And when this is realized, the spiritual journey truly begins. Now we come to the living heart of the spiritual path, the point where truth must pass from the level of concept into the depth of realization. For no amount of reading, no amount of hearing, no amount of believing can awaken the Christ. Only recognition can. Recognition is not an act of the mind. Recognition is an opening of consciousness. Recognition is the gentle turning from appearance to reality, from form to substance, from the personal sense of self to the infinite I that stands behind all being. The Christ within you does not need to be awakened. It is already awake. It is already whole. It is already complete. What must awaken is your awareness of it. And this awareness comes through a simple, sacred practice that Joel Goldsmith called recognizing the presence. This is not something you do loudly. It is not something you do aggressively. It is not something you do with willpower or effort. It is something you do softly, tenderly, with the same stillness with which you might watch a sunrise or listen to the quiet breathing of a sleeping child. The practice begins with a pause. Whenever fear appears, you pause. Whenever lack appears, you pause. Whenever conflict appears, you pause. Whenever the mind rushes into reaction, you pause. In that pause, you withdraw your identification from the condition before you. You do not try to change the condition. You do not argue with it. You do not deny it. You simply look away from appearance and turn toward the I that is aware of it. You ask gently, who is the I that sees this? Who is the I that feels this? Who is the I that is present right now? This question, asked not intellectually but contemplatively, separates the false sense of self from the true. For the moment you ask, who is the I? The mind cannot answer. The body cannot answer. The emotions cannot answer. Only the silence can respond. And in that silence, the Christ begins to reveal itself. You begin to sense, even faintly, that the I which is aware of fear cannot fear. The I which is aware of lack cannot lack. The I which is aware of pain cannot suffer. The I which is aware of conditions is not conditioned by them. This gentle recognition is the first step in awakening the Christ within. Then, as you rest in this awareness, a second realization dawns. The I that I am is the presence of God. Not metaphorically, not figuratively, literally. You begin to see that the Christ is not something you become. It is something you uncover. You remove the belief that you are a limited person, and the Christ which has always been your true self stands revealed. This is why Joel Goldsmith taught that you never declare, I am sick, or I am poor, or I am afraid. The I that speaks these words is not the person you believe yourself to be. It is the Christ. And the Christ cannot be sick, cannot be poor, cannot be afraid. To attach I am to any appearance is to claim unreality as identity. And the moment you do that, you suffer. Recognition reverses this mistake. Recognition restores identity. Recognition is salvation. And so You practice, I am not seeking God. The I that I am is the presence of God. I am not lacking supply. The I that I am is infinite abundance. I am not trying to be healed. The I that I am is wholeness itself. This is not affirmation. Affirmations attempt to make something true. Recognition acknowledges what already is true. And the more you rest in recognition, the more natural it becomes. You begin to find yourself pausing throughout the day without effort. You begin to sense the presence even while engaged in ordinary activities. The Christ becomes not a momentary experience, but the background of your life, the quiet light that illumines every thought, every breath, every step. Perhaps at first, you feel only a slight peace. Then, a little more clarity. Then, a subtle joy that arises for no reason. Then, moments of profound stillness in which you seem to dissolve into the infinite. This is the Christ taking form in your awareness. This is the presence revealing itself as your true identity. And with this recognition, healing begins, not because you seek it, but because the false sense of self that clung to sickness dissolves. Harmony begins, not because you pursue it, but because the presence that is harmony reveals itself. Supply begins, not because you attract it, but because the infinite is experienced as the very substance of your being. Awakening the Christ is not a dramatic event. It is a quiet remembering, a soft yielding, a gentle trusting, a continual returning to the inner presence. And as this practice becomes the rhythm of your life, you will discover something astonishing. You no longer feel that God is guiding you, you feel that God is you. You no longer think of the presence as something within. You realize the presence is the very essence of the I that lives, moves, and breathes through you. This recognition is the foundation of the spiritual life. This recognition is the doorway to freedom. This recognition is the unveiling of the Christ within. Let us now move into the great transition of the spiritual path, the point at which recognition becomes embodiment, and the truth you contemplate begins to live itself through you. For it is one thing to recognize the Christ within, it is another to live as that Christ. And the difference lies in one simple shift, the dissolution of personal sense. What is personal sense? It is the belief that you are a separate being with a private life, a private mind, private fears, private burdens, private responsibilities. It is the belief that you must direct your life, solve your problems, heal your body, earn your supply, protect your identity. This is personal sense. And as long as you live from personal sense, you live outside the rhythm of the Christ. The Christ is the presence of God individualized as you. The Christ is infinite, life expressing through your form. The Christ is the I that needs nothing, fears nothing, lacks nothing, seeks nothing. The Christ does not struggle, does not strive, does not react, does not defend, does not resist. To live as the Christ is to let go of the belief that you, as a person, are living your life at all. You begin to sense gently at first, then more clearly that something deeper is living you. Something wiser is thinking through you. Something greater is guiding, sustaining, unfolding your every step. Joel Goldsmith once said that the greatest spiritual attainment is simply this: the end of the personal I, not the destruction of individuality, but the dissolving of the belief that your individuality is separate from God. When personal sense dissolves, life becomes effortless, not because circumstances change, but because identity changes. A wave that knows itself as water can never fear the wind. A branch that knows itself as the vine can never fear drought. A form that knows itself as spirit can never fear the world. And so you begin to walk differently. You begin to think differently. You begin to respond differently. Where you once said, I need supply, you now rest in, the I that I am is infinite abundance. Where you once said, I must fix this sickness, you now rest in, the I that I am cannot be sick. Where you once said, I am afraid, you now rest in, the I that I am is perfect peace. This is not denial, it is truth. It is living from the Christ rather than from personal sense. Living as the Christ means that you no longer take ownership of the outer picture. You no longer judge appearances as good or bad. You no longer interpret events through the lens of fear. You no longer see people as separate selves acting upon you. You see only the unfolding of consciousness, the movement of the inner presence, expressing as experience. And then something remarkable happens. Because you no longer live from personal sense, the world can no longer touch you personally. Criticism falls away. Praise falls away. Fear falls away. Ambition falls away. Regret falls away. Attachment falls away. All the burdens of personal identity sink into the nothingness from which they came. You discover that you are no longer living from reaction, but from realization. No longer from effort, but from presence. No longer from fear, but from love. No longer from need, but from completeness. This is not something you force. It is something that happens naturally as the recognition of the Christ deepens. You do not decide to live as the Christ. The Christ lives itself through you the moment you stop trying to live as a person. And so the spiritual life becomes simple. When a fear arises, pause. When a desire arises, pause. When an irritation arises, pause. When a judgment arises, pause. Each pause loosens the hold of personal sense. Each pause returns you to the Christ. Each pause reveals the infinite as the true I of you. Living as the Christ does not mean perfection of behavior. It means transparency of identity. You may still experience human feelings, but you no longer identify with them. You may still move in the world, but you no longer feel bound to it. You may still act, but the action is not yours. It is the unfolding of the presence. Eventually, you begin to sense a deep shift within. You are no longer trying to live the spiritual life. You are no longer trying to be awakened or enlightened or healed or supplied. You find that you are resting quietly, naturally, joyfully, in the realization that life is living itself as you. This is the end of personal sense. This is the beginning of Christed living. This is the essence of the infinite way. And now we come to a mystery that has puzzled seekers for centuries. Why was this teaching the Christ within the I am identity, the end of personal sense, not given openly to the world? Why did Jesus speak in parables? Why did the early mystics veil their wisdom? Why has so much of this truth remained concealed? It is not because truth was withheld. It is because consciousness was not yet prepared to receive it. You cannot give sunlight to a seed buried deep in the earth. You cannot feed solid food to an infant. You cannot pour the infinite into a vessel that still believes itself to be small. Humanity, for most of its history, has lived under the hypnosis of personal sense, identifying itself as flesh, as form, as mind, as emotion. A world that believes it is separate cannot bear the revelation that separation has never existed. A world that believes God is elsewhere cannot understand that God is the very life of its own being, and so the teaching lived quietly, passed from heart to heart, not because it was secret, but because it was sacred, not because it was exclusive, but because it required readiness, an inner maturity, a loosening of personal identity, a hunger for reality over comfort. The human mind cannot understand the impersonal nature of God. It wants a God who agrees with it, a God who blesses its tribe and condemns others, a God who judges the wicked and rewards the good, a God who behaves according to human expectation. But the Christ is not personal. The Christ is universal. The Christ is the I am of every being. Such a revelation cannot be accepted by those who still cling to separation, superiority, or fear. And so Jesus said, I have many things to tell you, but you cannot bear them now. Not because he was withholding mercy, but because revelation requires receptivity. Throughout history, humanity has met truth with resistance. When Jesus revealed the kingdom within, the world sought to silence him. When mystics in many traditions proclaimed oneness, they were dismissed or persecuted. When sages taught the end of personal identity, the world called it heresy. Why? Because the personal mind defends itself. It fears dissolution. It fears loss of control. It fears the infinite. Because the infinite ends the illusion of a separate self. And so truth appeared dangerous, not because it harms, but because it dissolves illusion. It threatens the false sense of power, the false sense of righteousness, the false sense of separation. But now something has changed. Human consciousness has begun to awaken, not everywhere, not all at once, but enough to allow the ancient teaching to rise again. The world has grown weary of fear-based living. It has grown weary of external authority. It has grown weary of dogma, conflict, and division. It has grown weary of seeking God in the sky while suffering on the earth. And so, in this age, the Christ teaching has begun to reemerge, not as religion, not as doctrine, but as inner revelation. It is rising because hearts have become ready. Minds have begun to soften. Personal sense has begun to crack under the weight of global transformation. Joel Goldsmith recognized that the time had come, that humanity was ready, not all, but many, to realize, I and the Father are one. He saw that souls everywhere were hungry, not for belief, but for experience, not for tradition, but for presence, not for authority, but for freedom. And so he spoke these truths openly, yet gently, trusting that those who were ready would hear, and those who were not ready would walk their own path until the moment came. Truth cannot be forced. It cannot be imposed. It cannot be demanded. It can only be revealed the moment the soul is ripe for it. This is why the teaching was hidden, not because it was meant for a chosen few, but because it awaited the awakening of the many. And now you are here listening, seeking, sensing the stirrings of something ancient within you. This reveals that your own consciousness has ripened, that you stand on the threshold of the Christ awareness that Jesus embodied and Joel Goldsmith taught. The teaching is no longer hidden. It is whispered now into every heart that is ready. For the time has come. And now, as we draw this journey to its resting place, let us once again turn inward, not toward the words that have been spoken, not toward the concepts we have explored, but toward the silence from which they came. For if you hear only the words, you receive information. But if you touch the silence, you receive revelation. The entire purpose of this message, from the first moment to this final breath, has been to point you back to the I that you are. Not the personal I, not the human identity that carries your name, your history, your memories, your successes, your burdens, but the infinite I, the Christ, the presence of God expressing as your very being. You have not been invited merely to think about the Christ. You have been invited to enter the Christ, to live from the center where the Father speaks, to stand in the awareness that the kingdom is within, to rest in the truth that I and the Father are one. The spiritual path is not the acquiring of anything. It is the releasing of everything that is not you. Every belief in separation, every attachment to personal identity, every fear, every judgment, every attempt to make life conform to your will. These fall away naturally when you turn within and recognize the I that lives you. And so, as we conclude, I ask you to pause just for a moment and notice the quiet presence that is here, not the sound of these words, not the activity of your mind, but the stillness beneath them. That stillness is the Christ. That stillness is the I am. That stillness is the infinite life that has always been your true self. It does not need to be reached. It does not need to be invoked. It does not need to be earned. It needs only to be recognized. And as you recognize it, even for these few moments, you step into a new way of being. You are no longer a seeker of God. You are an expression of God. You are no longer a traveler on the path. You are the path being walked. You are no longer a person on a spiritual journey. You are spirit unfolding in form. This is the living I am. And when you begin to live from this recognition, something subtle but extraordinary begins to occur. Your problems lose their authority. Your fears lose their voice. Your burdens lose their weight. Your past loses its hold. Your future loses its threat. Why? Because you are living not from the personal self, but from the presence that is untouched by time, untouched by circumstance, untouched by the world. You begin to feel the quiet joy that arises for no reason. You begin to sense a guidance that requires no thought. You begin to perceive a harmony that does not depend on conditions. You begin to love without effort, forgive without struggle, trust without fear. This is not self-improvement. This is not spiritual achievement. This is not transformation of the person. This is the revelation of the self. And so I leave you with this simple invitation, the same invitation given by Jesus, the same invitation taught by Joel Goldsmith, the same invitation whispered by every awakened soul throughout the ages. Abide in the I, rest in the I, live from the I, know the I. Let the I live you. For the moment you do, even for a breath, the Christ is no longer a concept. It becomes your living identity. And from that moment on, life unfolds not from effort, but from grace. This is the journey. This is the teaching. This is the revelation. This is the I am